Hi,
Hello.
thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me in this amazing place.
It's funny because we've had conversations about this vision for probably I want to say 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
Yep.
And I think we've both been experiencing pretty significantly this, oh my God, things happening like that we can't really explain. And so we met, had I met you before the John Couch one?
Yeah, we'd met at Erasmus and Sophie's
Gotcha.
party.
Okay, cool. So for context, we had the launch event for Whole Collective in 2023,
Yeah.
where we had John Couch and Darcy who came in and did this. We did that.
I was there for that. Yeah.
But then you came up afterwards and say, "Hey, I work with James Blake, the Grammy-nominated, award-winning musician, just no small feat," and said, "Hey, can you do an event with James around conscious creativity?" So we did that, and I think that's a good place to start in terms of the creative outlook, because you've been in the creative world your entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to touch a little bit on how you started as a kid?
I was kind of born into it, really. My mum was a royal ballet trained dancer, and she had her own studio by that point. And my dad worked at the BBC, and he was, when I was born, he was what's called a vision mixer, who kind of, it's like live editing, essentially, clicking between all the cameras, but he worked on all the big, like Monty Python, Fawlty Towers, like every classic British comedy, sitcom, game show, the sort of light entertainment world. So I grew up in those studios, and he then became a director, and I would literally every weekend be sitting in a studio surrounded by
John Cleese.
Yeah, people like that, but seeing the real people, right? So I always say I was a behavioural analyst from a very early age, because I knew what the public persona was of these people, and, people who knew that I was, that I knew them were like, oh my God, they're like this, they're like that. And I was like, well, that's not what I see in the studio. I'd see a very different, it's like you're literally seeing behind the curtain. And so I saw how the creative process came to be, and how there was so much sort of chaos and turbulence. And then the moment it was action, it all came in, and then it would dissolve to chaos again. So I saw that rhythm early on, and it was almost like an outward expression of what goes on internally with each person, that dissolution to creativity, back to dissolution again. So I had this sort of innate understanding of the arts and the artist, and all our family friends were creatives to some degree, either in front of the camera or behind. And both my parents had also come from a theatre background. So every school holiday, we were in the car driving to some town up north or in Wales where they'd been on tour and knew people there. It's like they knew people all over the country. So I was very exposed to that.
You mentioned kind of how they were different behind the scenes. Like, how did that manifest most often?
Yeah, I mean, the main theme that I would say across, this is, I'm generalizing, not everybody was like this, but it was just the fear. Even the people who were known to be difficult on set and were, kind of challenging and antagonistic and shouting at everybody, I knew even at a very young age, they're just terrified. And that's just a defense mechanism. And it is a very vulnerable thing as a creative person to put yourself up in, and particularly at the BBC, you've got these huge studios, and there's literally 100-odd people all doing something that's focused on you. And if you mess up, all of them go,
right? Oh my God.
So it's like that. It's a lot, and I always say to artists, because I help people with performance anxiety, things like that. And, I always say we shouldn't say that's not normal. It is absolutely natural and human to feel anxious when you're going up on a stage in front of several thousand people and doing a highly skilled task. Or if you're in a studio, even if you know you can do it again, the clock's ticking and everyone's like, you get the eye roll from the crew, and like, God, it's such pressure to just be on your game. And so you're taking what are, creative people are hypersensitive by nature. You need to be to have the degree of sense, sight, hearing, touch to be able to have that degree of finesse in your creativity makes you hypersensitive, or is a product of you being hypersensitive. And then you take that hypersensitive person and put them in a very vulnerable position in a very volatile industry that's predicated on next, nail it, or you're out. So we shouldn't, for me, that should be part of the training for those that are training in the arts. It was never a part of training. In fact, training was very fear-based. I was in full-time theatre arts training from the age of 7, and it was literally, do it again, don't cry. Go, if you mess up, go out and stand outside the room, so you're terrified into achieving versus doing it for the joy of it.
It's funny, we were for press and record, wow, perfectionism, get the words out. But this idea of perfectionism, I think we're so ingrained with this idea that everything needs to be perfect. And we, historically, like you've been you've seen this industry for a few decades in that sense. And that story hasn't changed in terms of like trying to get it perfect. And we've heard so many stories around, the behind the scenes. I mean, so many movies, made out of like the behind the thing, whether it's the art or the sport or the people breaking down behind the scenes. And I'm assuming, and this is my assumption, but like, how do people, in any capacity, whether you're visible in any sense, whether it's on stage or in arenas or in business, like how do people traditionally cope with that? Like what are the tools that we've gone towards?
Well, there's how do people cope, and how, what might be a better way to cope. So, one of the ways that people cope is, we have in the performing arts, particularly literature on artists. There's a lot of research into, what is a creative person, and what are the challenges and what are the behaviours. And there's a disproportionately high rate of addiction, for instance, in the creative population versus general population. And people, will often put that down to, oh yeah, well, they're all just, drinking and doing drugs, they're just kind of hippie culture. It's like, no, it's actually, that's a coping mechanism, because there is actually a fundamental difference in brain anatomy and physiology that predicts creativity, or at least the degree of creativity. So yes, we can talk about how, creativity is not something that can be captured and measured, but there are some things that we can look at in our biology that help us understand some of the features that seem to be associated with creativity. And one of them is that there are structural differences in our dopamine uptake. So dopamine is the reward chemical. That's one of its jobs. It's way more complex than that, but it's what it's known for is, getting a dopamine hit from something you enjoy.
The anticipation of something arriving.
Yeah, it's kind of, a lot of artists, particularly if they've been trained in that sort of fear-based way, are literally doing a dance between reward and punishment. And that can also get skewed when you've been trained in this whiplash kind of way, and then you finally do something well and the teacher goes, yes, good. You're almost skewing the boundaries between reward and punishment. You're getting a dopamine hit from punishing yourself because you think that's how you're supposed to do it, so there's this little bit of smudging that goes on, particularly with when you've been through that experience of arts training. So what that means is that when dopamine basically helps calm the nervous system. So we're talking about volatility, anxiety. We're looking for, can someone kind of auto-correct, self-regulate their nervous system? And dopamine is a part of how we do that. It's soothing. And so we have natural dopamine in our system, but there's an area of the brain that helps us deal with filtering signals from the environment. I mentioned that creatives are typically hypersensitive, right? If you're a musician, you can hear if something's just slightly out of key, right? It's that that someone else would, I didn't hear that, right? If you're a dancer, you know the exquisite movements of your body, and if something's not quite right in your body, it's like, that's not right. And someone else goes, it looks fine. It's like, no, it's not right. So that degree of sensitivity requires us to have this quite loud sensory system, and we're being bombarded in every moment with ambient noise, with smells, with all these things. And there's a part of our brain that helps filter that down so that we are not like distracted the whole time. There's a bird, there's a plane, there's a whatever. And it requires dopamine to do that. So that area of the brain absorbs dopamine, and that down-regulates the noise so that you can focus on a narrow task without being distracted. And creatives are often known for being very distracted, right? They're always like, halfway through a conversation, they're talking something else. You're like, wait, what was, wait.
Yeah.
And we're always like, what was that? What was that? So what's been shown is that area of the brain that does the filtering in creative people, those who are more up the creative end of the spectrum, everybody's creative on some level, the more creative people have fewer receptors for that dopamine on that particular area of the brain. So my phrase for that is they're less able to filter the crazy, right? So they're hearing everything, taking in everything, and it gets overwhelming. So then you want the world to go quiet, and you need dopamine to do that, but you don't have as many receptors to soak that up in the area of the brain that can do that job for you.
So you outsource the tools and substances.
So then you reach for something that'll give you that externally, because you're not able to access it internally. And that brain anatomy is shared with, sort of a more extreme version of it is bipolar disorder and schizophrenia as well. That is also a feature of those conditions. So, I am not pathologizing creativity in any way.
No, I
think it's an issue, but it's something that if we're aware of it, then we can work with it.
Yeah.
And we know how to handle it better.
Well, there's a couple of things that you said in there which I really personally relate with. I mean, firstly, the addiction piece, and I think that feels like a loaded word, but truthfully, we're all addicted to something in some capacity, whether it's our phone, obsessing, control, whatever the thing is. So, but it's the same idea in that sense. But I identify as I've abused substances in the past, and I'm very happy talking about that. But in a community now of people who identify as addicts and abusing substances in that capacity, the common thread is everybody is very sensitive. And and for me, what you said about the sound piece, the creative bit in me felt like it unlocked with the pain and the grief 6 years ago. Like I hadn't tapped into thinking I was a creative or music, and then the feeling, the sensation that came through my body by grieving unlocked this sensitivity in me, which is where the music came through. And then then it's kind of been the sensitivity dial just keeps dialing up. And so even now I'm so painfully sensitive to sound, and I walk around with earplugs in my pocket the whole time, because sometimes I go into restaurants and it's too loud, and I guess my question to you is, it feels like that, or my theory is that creative gate can be unlocked in anyone. And yes, whilst there's some preceptors in the brain that are different, and the way that somebody in my addiction community related to it, they said that all addicts don't produce enough serotonin, so they're reaching for the thing. But yeah, how do you think people kind of unlock that creativity gate and also do it in a sustainable way where you're not doing the things that are fun until they're not?
Yeah, and I feel that's just coming from an understanding of the, because a lot of people who have that experience think it's just some random thing, or I'm crazy, or I'm and you label yourself as, and you just think it's a bad behavior rather than a product of biological processes. And also it's the nature versus nurture discussion. There are also experiences in childhood that predict the degree of creativity in adulthood, and one of them is childhood adversity. So the fact that you went through an adverse experience, and from that was born this more obvious expression of your creativity, is again supported by the literature. And the reason being, if you think of, you know, an infant when it's born, it is inherently creative, right? It's making connections, it's connected to, there's a fairy and there's a monster under the bed and my imaginary friend, and we're going, no, that's not real.
Probably is.
Yeah. Right? So we have this idea that aging or growing and getting older as a child is a process of development. We call it childhood development, like we're growing more things and we're getting better at them, whereas it's actually the reverse, because infants come in with ultimate connectivity to all sorts of things, and then the conditioning of the world is, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, and you start getting your neuronal tree snipped like a bonsai until it fits a socially acceptable model of what will make you acceptable in a particular culture, and you lose those connections, or you will get cut off from a lot of those connections. And the difference with creative people, so if your environment is very comfortable, you've got wonderful parents, you have all your needs met, you need for nothing, you feel loved, you feel like you have self-worth, then you don't need to escape anywhere. So actually you're quite happy to prune your tree till it fits the shape, because, well, it's fine, I want to fit in here, it feels good. But if you're in a situation in your childhood that's a little volatile, that you don't feel, oh God, if I say that, I'm going to trigger her and then she's going to yell at me, you know, there's that constant tiptoeing around. So it doesn't have to be frank trauma and abuse. It can just be an emotionally distant parent where you feel that your self-esteem is contingent upon you managing their behavior, and essentially the child becomes the parent and they're having to manage the whole environment. And actually they don't want to be around that because it's not comfortable. So they actually retain a lot of those neuronal pathways of connectivity because it's a great place to escape to. I can just go back into that other place and just disappear for a while.
So basically raise your kids with some adverse conditions and be creative.
Yeah. Well, there are other ways to do it that don't necessarily involve that.
Okay, so if, say, this golden age idea that, you know, humanity's moving into, where our basic needs are met and we all have universal basic income, and, you know, we're so informed about parenting and conscious development that we aren't raising kids outside of, you know, with adverse conditions. Does that mean we are creative? We live a creative death then?
No. I mean, it's you know, to even define creativity is kind of, you know, say it's a spectrum, right? We're talking about those who tend to be going into earning their living, for, you know, making it their profession, versus somebody who, I mean, everybody's creative in everything they do, but some people have more. That one of the descriptors of how you categorize creativity is the capacity for divergent thought. So some people are very suited to focusing on a very narrow task and doing it very precisely, and that's convergent thought, and they're not distracted by anything around them. Then you've got the divergent thought, which is what we talked about before, like, I'm hearing everything in the room. You know, your issue with sound is not so much just volume, it's just you're not filtering. So typically we're having a conversation, so if there's ambient noise around us, we kind of fade. It's like we've got a sound desk in our head and we fade down the ambient noise so that we can focus on just the voice that we're talking to. But I'm the same. You put me in a restaurant where there's so much ambient noise and music playing and people chatting at other tables, I hear all of it at the same level, and I find it very hard to focus on one person's voice. So that's an inability to filter versus just a volume issue.
It's funny, like, even as you were saying that, I was like, oh yeah, I haven't really been paying attention to the noise outside because I'm listening to what you're saying.
Yeah, but there'd become a point if it started to get noisy that your attention would go to
I was at a lunch last weekend where 8 of us around the table and everyone's like starts really loud, and I was like, I can't talk to you.
I'm like, one at a time,
Bye. This idea, how many times can you say creativity? But this idea is, I think when I started writing music and writing, that was a traditionally creative outlet, and I say quote marks, writing a Substack and writing journals and writing my thought and then writing those into song and music. But there's been so many aspects of my life that I have created, the community, like this series, this business, I think this idea that there is a creative life and there's not, I think that it's an energy which is available for everyone. So even if it's in a business sense, it's pure creative energy that's being used to build a business, pure creative energy to build and grow a family, to build a home, to even if you're renting a home, to create the new place that you're moving into, to find all the things. It's just like this whole idea. And there was something that you shared in your when you were doing the talk with James a couple of years ago that really stuck with me. I think it was then, but it was around the idea of creative seasons. Because I've been on this journey of I guess having an idea of how I want to live my life for the last 5-6 years, which I'm very grateful and blessed that today I'm kind of living it. I have friends, family, community. I'm doing work that I love. I'm ticking the boxes on lots of things that I had a vision for. But in the last few years, it felt like there were so many times when I was like hitting the bottom of like, why can't I figure this out? And like, I thought the money was going to come this way and it didn't. And like, I thought this client was going to happen and it didn't. I thought, this, so many ups and downs. And I loved what you said around this creative season process, because I mean, I'd love you to share that, but it kind of, the way that you described it is, there's a winter, which is the most fertile period, but it almost like guaranteed that there would be a spring.
Yeah. Seeds need to be buried before they can grow.
But how do you, I'd love to kind of hear more about that process in terms of, because it was so, it really helps, I think when you're in like the dark, when nothing seems to be going right, and I personally, I know a lot of friends get hit with like, I'm not doing enough.
Yeah, and not honouring so everything in the universe is cyclical, right? We have rhythms within rhythms within rhythms, and then nested, we talk about seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, seasons, years, decades, these are all cycles, and our bodies are also doing these cycles. It's just an in-breath and out-breath. The universe just does contraction and expansion rhythmically all the time. That's all we are. But we, particularly in the Western world, kind of steamrolled out the honouring of those rhythms. Even in, I want to have summer fruits available all winter, right? Even that, we're not honouring the seasons of how we eat and how we grow food. We're kind of overriding it, homogenizing it, and turning it into a factory version so that you can get anything anytime, rather than eating with the seasons. So it's the same with the body. We all know we have very many cycles. Every breath you take is a cycle. Your cranial rhythm is a cycle. Your, the female cycle. And again, we tend to want to control those and override them rather than go with them. When you do override them, and sometimes, we don't live in utopia. Sometimes it's like, I have to get this done this week and I have a deadline and that's it. But at least to be consciously knowing that you're overriding it and promising yourself that you'll give yourself the respite at another time. You can negotiate a bit, but where you can follow those rhythms, then you'll allow for the creativity to come without forcing it. When you talk about writer's block or something like that, it's often because you haven't honoured the cycle. It's just like if you don't sleep, sleep is a cycle. If you don't sleep for a week, you're not going to be very productive. So as we were talking before about the dopamine being part of the filtering mechanism and the reward system, the soothing, regulating system, it is also cyclical as well. So we have peaks and troughs of dopamine release. And that's a daily cycle, but it's also a larger cycle as well, a more seasonal cycle, as you mentioned. And there was some research done on some of the great composers of the sort of 1700s, 1800s, Mozart's, the Beethovens, the Schumanns, and all of whom were documented to have had or experienced what we now call mental health challenges. Often in those days it was called melancholic depression, right? So that they were known to have periods of great euphoric kind of fabulousness and their works being performed and they're at their peak, and then they had these times where they were in the depths of despair and didn't want to be on the planet anymore. And what they did was looked at their personal journals, they looked at the medical records of those individuals, and they looked at, and then they overlaid that on their periods of proliferation in composition or whatever. And it showed that that cycle was there. So when they were in the depths of the darkness, they really weren't being productive and they felt like they didn't want to be around anymore. But as they came into the upswing, which is always going to happen, the degree to which the height of the peak and trough can vary, but it's always there, even if it's subtle. As they started to rise out from that winter phase, as we could call it, where they'd been buried, well, that seed had been buried under the soil in the darkness, but that was where it was germinating. So that upward peak of their dopamine flow was when they wrote. That was their proliferation of composition. And then they reach the top of it and they're in the euphoric state and it's all being performed and they're getting the applause and life is wonderful. And then the applause starts to die down, because it always will. The show has to end at some point. And so many artists, myself included, you know, I used to do these big, you know, I was a singer with a big band and big kind of loud performances, and you come off and you're buzzing, and then you get home and it's just like a cup of tea, you know, it's just, and then let's have a glass of wine, and because the quiet, the extreme of that is too much to tolerate. So coming back to these composers, it showed that, and what I always say to musicians is that the dark times, as unpleasant as they are, and I'm not trying to, you know, diminish them and say, well, just enjoy it. You know, it can be very, very difficult. But those darker times are the fertile soil for the next phase of creativity. So if you can develop some tools to be able to manage it, to anticipate it, to know it's coming, don't be surprised when you're suddenly feeling low. It's like, oh, I'm just in winter. You're not surprised. Well, here in California, we don't have many seasons, but back in England, you're not surprised that around October, November, it's getting chilly and it's starting to rain a lot more, right? So when that happens, don't be surprised by it. Go, okay, I've got my tools to handle it, and honour it if you can, and know that it is honouring you with the time for that germination of the seed to produce your next explosion of expression and creativity.
Thank you, because I mean that I remember either hearing that when I was, I've had so many dark depths of melancholy, as they'd call it, which I don't think, you know, and that's part of the mission for this whole series in Conversations. Is I struggle with the term mental health because I think it implies that there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, we're pathologizing something that is a natural cycle.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, you know, I speak to so many friends. I spoke to one of my dear friends yesterday. She's like, oh, there's something wrong with me. I was like, there's nothing wrong with you. And I think, you know, especially like the diagnosis and the Western medical industry, which I won't go into too much because I actually don't want this to get censored. Lol. Is it's given this idea of like, hey, here's something to fix.
Yeah, if there's nothing wrong with you, they haven't got a job. You know, I'm an osteopath and we were always trained that, you know, there's never anything, you know, I say this to all my patients, even though it's the weirdest thing when they're coming with an issue of some sort. I said, there is never anything wrong with the body, ever. That is an arrogance on our part born of ignorance. Your body is simply responding to stimulus and it's giving you information. I say inflammation is information. It's an alarm going, hey, look at this. And you're trying to switch it off. And again, I train a lot of practitioners and I always say you don't treat the what, you treat the why. The what is the symptom expression? Yes, you might need to manage that in some way just to make it more tolerable for the person, but you've got to get to, well, why did that express itself there? And you go back to that, and often that can be deep in the emotional, deep in the a deeper story of the body, of their ability to express themselves creatively. I find I mainly treat artists, so I have a bit of a bias in that sense, but I'm often like, this is trapped creativity. What are you not expressing? What do you feel that you're not able to show? Well, I've created this thing, but no one's going to like it. Bang. That is playing out in this area of your body. So the body is it's wonderful. I love what I do because it's like the body's giving you everything you need to know. I'm just good at decoding it. Yeah. So I'm not fixing anything.
I want to ask you everything wrong with the body right now. I'm like, oh, can you diagnose this?
But it's like, get to the story underneath it, and that process is creative in itself. You've got to think creatively.
It's funny, just like this, what felt like this explosion that happened in my body and my life. Dancing helped me move through the grief. I never called myself a dancer, but it was just
everybody is creative. Everybody's a dancer,
and it's just like the way that energy started moving through my body, and like now I see myself as a very creative person in many areas: music, business, life, family. But this, that point around, I think a very common story that I've had with lots of people in this chair and people in businesses is I was in this corporate job. And then it got to this point that my body broke down in some capacity. And then I had to make a life change. And then that set me off on this path of building this business or taking a completely different direction. It's always this, 9 times out of 10, the people that I spoke to who made that significant, decision away from corporate, I say corporate 9 to 5, but, living the hustle life, it was their body speaking to them.
Yeah. The body, I always say the loudness, if you like, of your symptoms is the degree to which you've strayed from your truth. That's all the body is doing. It's a course correction. Symptoms are a course correction. And everyone's looking to blame it on everything else, but the one thing that is often the hardest to change. If you are in a corporate so-called job and it's giving you the lifestyle that it's paying for the car and the house and all the things. So to step away from that is terrifying, but it's not you and it's not your truth. Your body doesn't care about paying the mortgage or the car payment. The body is like, you're not on your path. My job is to kick you back onto it, and I'm going to keep shouting at you. You can keep taking your headache tablet or whatever, but I'm not going to, that's not solving the problem, right? Why do you have that headache every time you meet that particular person? The body's going, no, get away from them. They're not in resonance with you. So if you learn to speak the language of the body, I would say all I'm doing in treatment situations is being the translator. It's like I can just interpret what your body's saying, and it's almost like the body goes, oh, thank God, somebody's listening. Could you tell it, right, this, and this, and then I can translate that, but then it's up to that person to then make those changes or not. It's not up to me, but at least it's like, and as I say, sometimes we have to put ourselves in situations that aren't in our truth and aren't, exactly what we want to be doing. But there's a difference between doing that consciously and unconsciously. I'm always having conversations with my body and going, look, I know gut, you don't like this. I hear you. I am not ignoring you. But trust me, I'm doing the human thing. So this is the most expedient way to get this done right now. And I'll give you the time later. I have a board meeting with my body every evening, and I go, okay, who didn't I listen to today? Who needs to yell? It's like create that forum for the body to give you that information so that it doesn't have to yell. It's like the kid that's tugging your leg and going, Mom, and you're like, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. And then they have a toddler meltdown, right? Because you didn't listen the first time. So if you allow that conversation every day, give yourself that time, learn to understand. And at first you might get crickets and feel really stupid. Yeah. But if you really start to dial in, the body tells you everything you need to know. And then I'm not a fan of just having our practices, although they're useful. Oh, I sit on my yoga mat and do my practice every morning. The nervous system is highly context specific. Yeah. So it will go, oh, yoga mat, that's where we're chill and lovely. The rest of my life is a, crapshoot. So you then have to take what you've learnt from that practice and then apply it during daily life, like in context. So that email comes up. Why do I get that feeling when I hear the email signal, the texting? Because you've got a contentious situation going on at the moment. It's like, okay, that happened, override it. How do I take that breath practice and I can do it in a split second. And then you actually get to the point, at first you're just like, it happened and you override, it happened and you override. The more you bring your awareness to it, you actually get to the point. I'm at the point now, I'll walk into a place I don't know and I'm already using my super hypersensitive, creative radar to read the room and go, that's a problem, this is nice energy, this is not. And I buffer my system to adapt to any situation. We've all been entrained into survival of the fittest. It's not, it's survival of the adaptable. Can you throw yourself into any situation anywhere and auto-correct to accommodate it? If the temperature goes up, can your body regulate itself in the face of that? When we are emotionally rigid, we are physiologically rigid. So we're less able, a lot of people talk these days about metabolic inflexibility and people having all these hormonal issues and imbalances. And yes, there are environmental issues that contribute to that, but it's also the degree to which we are emotionally flexible and adaptable. Those are all systems of adaptation. The immune system, the hormonal systems, the thyroid, all those things.
You touched on this idea of like survival, and there's this. Well, I have this idea that if you're not listening to this voice, like there was a voice inside of me that said, "Go make music, go do something else, you get out of this. I don't know what it is," and I feel like that's shunned down. And so many of us, because that's crazy. Like,
you can't title living doing that.
Yeah. And this, the manifestation of disease is higher in today's, with all the stats and figures around cancers and heart disease and all the stuff that our body is breaking down. And I think we're both on the same page. That is, from my perspective, that is our body saying, you're not living your truth. And we're going to get your attention in a big way.
Yeah.
And actually, the prevention of a lot of those kind of things can happen with the recentering into how are we living in this truth? What's the voice that wants to come through with this expression? Yeah, it's just kind of wild. Like if you don't follow your sense of purpose, like it's going to kill you, literally. Yeah.
And it's not that, again, I don't like this idea of feeling like there's somebody telling you what to do. It's you wrote the script when you came down. And so you're only trying to, your body's just like, okay, you wrote the script and you've given me the job of keeping you on track. And yes, there are many different ways you could get to that goal. It's not like it's a very narrow thing. You're allowed, well, not allowed, that's again a permissive word. You have the capacity for being creative in how you achieve that goal and which path you get to it. There are many roads that lead to Rome or whatever. So but you've tasked your body with the job of keeping you on track, and then you yell at it or try and switch it off when it's going, but Mom, I said.
Who said hi? I have this friend who, so you met my friend Kate?
Yes.
So she helped me so much with my own, perspective on my mind and body, all the stuff. And I had a dear friend in Australia who, she was in the corporate advertising gig, and I won't mention her name, but she'll know who it is. And she was experiencing panic attacks and anxiety and all these things. I was like, you have to speak to Kate. And she is now, a few years later, she's now, instead of working in the advertising industry, she's a full-time photographer. And I haven't spoken to her in a minute, but just that it was her life completely changed. And she's now she's so brilliant at what she does. And she has all these like baby maternity shoots. So she gets paid full time. She makes a living out of doing this thing. And so this idea of panic attack and even the mental symptoms like depression and anxiety, I say that again, quote marks, it's literally just like us our body screaming. So, you know, there's so many symptoms, the way that it manifests for us.
Yeah, and the extremes of those, because like I say, the highs and lows of our emotions are a natural phase. You know, if, I would say it's like if everything was, we talked about perfection, if everything was perfect in your life, it'd be very boring, right? There's no momentum. We need contrast. If you talk about physics, you need polarity to create momentum. You need a pressure gradient, a difference to create momentum. So when we try and dial that out, the body's going to hold. It's a bit like a volcano, right? You're trapping that energy in such that it then has to do a huge correct by going to extremes to then come back to the middle. And I often say with people who've experienced these extremes, you need to go to the extremes to find the middle, because you don't know where the middle is for you, because it's different for everyone. If you haven't experienced those things, people always, I try to avoid judgmental labels like positive and negative. I'm like, a battery has a positive and negative charge. Both are required, or the thing doesn't work. And the fact that we talk about, I'm thinking positively, I'm doing positive thinking. I'm like, no, the lessons are in the negative. You've got to go and look at that. And when we talk about the dark night of the soul and all those kind of things, it's often like, well, the dark's the bad thing, and all our media is, all the stories we've been told as kids, all the movies, the dark is the bad, and that's where the baddies and the villains live, and the light's all lovely.
Yeah.
But it's like, if you only live in a world of light and there is no dark, well, then there's no context for the light. So it just is. You can't even enjoy it because it just is a default state.
Yeah, the capacity for pain and joy being the same thing.
Exactly. They're both the opposite ends of the battery charge that are both required, and we need to be able to dance between them in an elastic way, in an adaptable way. And things that we don't like in life, people that we don't like in life, are often mirroring back to us the aspects of ourself that we've denied. I would say the world, as on fire as it is right now, all these volatile conflicts going on.
It's good shit.
It's not because people hate each other.
Yeah.
It's because they hate themselves.
And
they don't know themselves, and they haven't honoured the dark in themselves. So when they see it in another, they have to throw rocks at it. So,
well, there's also like, the reason I said it's good shit is because it's the fuel. I think there's this idea that John Couch says, he said the other day that just the art is in the struggle. Like, it's in the it's in the struggle. I had there's a thing that I do often, not often, when I tell people about Tom, and I say, he died. Some people's first reaction is, okay, I'm sorry, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a different reaction that I get from certain people, which is they don't say anything. They just say, and I can tell that those people have experienced something similar. And maybe it's not like, massive grief but something tragic has happened to them. Because what I perceive, not all the time, but most of the time in that situation, there's an understanding that pain has been the greatest gift.
Yeah, catalyst.
It's so that a level of grief and pain was the best thing that's ever happened to me. And it's such a weird thing to say if for people who don't understand that creative thing, but it was the fuel for so much joy and so much expansion. And I think, societally we've been said, live in the grey, or supposed to be light and shiny, and talk about kind of the being afraid of the dark. I say this in kind of like I don't know how I mean it, but I love this idea of like being this like black shadow, like lover. Like, I'm in there. I've sat in my shit. I've sat in there, and I've learned to see the version of me in there. And it's not. And then we have this idea of like of evolution and growing, that it's like going to be all, as you say, lights and crystals up your butt and whatever.
Yeah, we've been entrained to believe that the human experience should be just about getting everything right and achieving these things, and not on. And it's this place is.
So it's like the most powerful like medicine was like being in that place, and it's not to like reject that thing.
No,
it's also to use it into this.
Yeah, and the analogy I always use for that is I call the planet, if you like, the frequency gym. Right, you go to the gym to lift weights against resistance in order to increase your strength. So the world is doing that to us on a daily basis. If you've got a challenging person up in your face, I'm like, oh, you're my dumbbells for today. Can I hold my tone in the face of your energy? And in doing so, I'm going to strengthen myself. So I see everybody as my kind of tools of my gym. And it's like, oh, that gives me because again, we can all get on a yoga mat and be, oh, I'm in bliss and it's zen. Can you do that when someone's yelling in your face? That's the frequency gym. So you've got to take those skills and test them in the real world and use the world as your weights.
And I like what you said. It's like, I mean, on the one hand, you can perceive the world right now as a total shit show, environmentally, politically, socially, all the things. And yet, if you're using that analogy, like we are being given more fuel than ever before to transform an entire generation into, I don't want to say rock stars, but like power creators, like creative
time of
energy.
Metamorphosis, just like the caterpillar goes in and it breaks down to mush. I mean, it's literally disintegrated and then reinvents itself into a butterfly, but nobody likes the mush phase, right? That's not pretty. And we're talking about cycles and this nested idea of cycles. What's known as the great cycle or the great year is the 24,000 year cycle, which is how long it takes our solar system to do one circuit of the Milky Way, our galaxy.
The Milky Way's moving?
It's not a chocolate bar.
Okay, cool.
It's spinning, right? So we're out on the boonies on a little spiral arm of the Milky Way, and we're going around it, but we don't just go round on a flat disc. We go down for 12,000 roughly years, up for 12,000 years. Then we cross the event horizon and we go up for 12,000 years and back down. So it's a sinus wave, right? So this is when we go down below that event horizon, that's known as the Dark Ages, right? It's the descending into the Dark Ages.
Where are we now?
May 9th last year, 2024, we crossed, in one theory, there are many, it's nebulous. And this is across so many ancient teachings. In Buddhist, it's known as the Great Year, right? That cycle. It's the Kali Yuga, so we have all these different names for it. So we've just emerged from the Dark Age cycle where we were out of line of sight of the galactic central sun, right? So May 9th, supposedly last year, was the point at which we crossed that event horizon. So this is messy, right? Because we're literally staggering out of the apocalypse where we've been oppressed and it's been power over top-down structures. Because when people are in the dark and going, oh, I don't know, I don't have photonic light information from galactic central sun, which upgrades our DNA, we were out of line of sight of that. So we were very controllable. But
which is why we look for systems and structures which kind of created...
it's opportunistic. All right, they're in the Dark Ages, let's power in and pile in and we can use that to our advantage. What we're now doing is, right, so all this talk in the last 10 years, but a little bit longer than that, but more in popular culture, 10 years of consciousness, awakening, like all this language of light. People weren't talking, there weren't all these podcasts with these big bros all talking about love and consciousness, so... This is because we are now getting the photonic, we are biophotonic, right? We're made of light particles. So we're now getting this much denser, higher bandwidth information from galactic central sun. And we're going, oh, here we go. And so we're all this talk of waking up. And then we're realizing, well, we don't need people. I don't need someone to tell me what to do. Thank you very much. I got this. You're done. You can go. But the people who have predicated their entire infrastructure upon controlling people don't like it. So we're in that volatility of they're desperately trying to lock us down, whack-a-mole us down, because they're like, if we don't lock them down now, we'll lose them because they're going to wake up.
It's funny though, because I feel like I can only speak from my experience, but how I perceived the world 6 years ago until, great tragedy and grief kind of changed my perspective on everything, and also then the pandemic, and it was so simple and so just, I thought, here's what you're supposed to do: good school, good job, and blah blah blah, do the things, and then I'll meet a man and I'll get a relationship and do the house, and perspective, tick all those boxes, And I was miserable. There was something like screaming inside me, which was just like, this ain't it. And if I think about this transformation, which, you know, in a relatively short space of time, which is, and I think people have been doing this transformation for thousands of years. I'm not the first person to have shifted my life and then become, I think, I would use the word spiritual, but I would say much more autonomous in my perspective. Like I think about politically, like, I don't care what's happening. Like, I'm living my own life, you know, and take what you want from that. But, you know, all these systems that, yes, I need a visa to live here, but yes, I need money, but like
it's just a layer that you have to play in.
Playing that layer rather than actually getting so caught up in all the things.
I always say it's none of my business.
But so people have been doing this journey for thousands of years, you know, the Stoics, for example. And what I think is really cool is that people have been talking about this journey from A to B. How do you get from this life of kind of closed mentality, shifted one view of the world, to then open and rigid and really stepping into a creative power? And I think my personal belief is that we're all handing down this journey of A to B for generations and generations. And who I learned from, and, you know, they were talking about the journey from A to B in one way, and how I describe that journey from A to B to, you know, people after me will be hopefully slightly more refined, slightly shorter. So I say this journey that, you know, from a life that was very disconnected to I love my life has taken 6 years. In the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot, but I think that journey is going to get so much quicker.
Yeah.
I look at my mum and my older sister, who are fully on their journey now, and it's happened in a much shorter space of time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of because I've been talking to them in my own ways, and maybe all the other, you know, sequences of life. But I think so many of us right now across the world are being given experiences in the form of XYZ, global or individual, to wake us up.
Yeah, and it's just that the codes of the field, if you like, are more we've got more bandwidth available to us now, and which means our perception of time will shift. Things, like you say, are happening like in the blink of an eye that would have taken 10 years to grind through, you know, a while back, and that's because time is not what we think it is anyway. It's a construct that we use to...
The fires were 5 months ago, 6 months ago. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And how many things have happened in the meantime? You know, it's like every day we're invited to view the next latest disaster.
Wild. Like, so much has happened.
So this pace is a feature of this, but kind of what you were speaking to there as well about the lineage of this. When we're talking about that Kali Yuga, and we have the Dark Ages and the Golden Ages, every 24,000 years, it's not just going round and round on one plane, it's a spiral. So every new Kali Yuga, we're higher, if you think of it in terms of musical frequency, which is really a good way to describe the energies of the universe, we're at the next octave. So we're not just repeating the pattern, we have more codes available, more consciousness. It's not that there is more consciousness. I'm trying to be specific about, you know, consciousness is innate. It's how much of it we are able to perceive is raising. So that, you know, typically the end of the Kali Yugas, the end of these cycles, were the great cataclysms, right? The floods or the fall of Atlantis or any of these things that, you know, it got so volatile that humanity had to kind of collapse and rebuild. But this particular Kali Yuga has been predicted in many texts, like from many years ago, talked about this one as being, because we're next octave up, this is the one where humanity has the potential to transcend it without having to completely crash the system and restart. So it's still going to get messy and volatile. We're still that caterpillar in the chrysalis, but we are going to be able to get through this a little battered and worn, but without having to go back to I'm an agrarian again and I've got to rebuild.
Well, I think on like an individual basis, you know, again, a common theme with lots of people who have been on this journey of repivoting out of one way of viewing the world to a different, you know, maybe more fulfilling, easier way of life. They've all had these great cataclysms in life that they've had to navigate. And I truly believe, like, that's not, I don't think everybody has to have a dark night of the soul now. I think we're getting that place where we're almost holding, for example, like being in this place, being in Venice, there is, on the one hand, there is so many industries collapsing overnight. There is so much to be fearful of. There are a lot of being laid off, layoffs even happening. There's so much like ending. And at the same time, I'm just surrounded by so much creativity, so many people building businesses, AI in like a positive way, it doesn't have to be in the negative. There's so much opportunity out there that I think this transition is all perspective, and that we don't have to hit this. We don't just have to see this massive.
No, it's just the way we've been told that. Well, this is how it's supposed to be. It's like, well, how about not? How about we welcome? And so many times, people, like you've just said, it's like 10 years later, they're like, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Whereas at the time, it felt like the worst. It's just a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
And necessity is the mother of invention, right? If everything's, it's a bit like when I was talking about childhood, if everything's comfortable to you, you don't need to create anything else, right? Because this is tolerable. When things are intolerable, that's when you have to create and invent. So we need friction, as I talked about, pressure gradients, friction. That's how, we're birthed into this world through a very fricative process, right? We are squeezed to the point of compression. And that's how, the energy of the universe is a torus field. At the quantum level to the entire universe is a big torus field. And the middle of that funnel is a compression squeeze point that is the generation for the next thing that's happening in every cell of our body. And it's happening cosmologically as well. We're just a nested Russian doll version of it, and you pick your scale. But when you can see that all those, compression and release, contraction, expansion are required, don't deny one of them, because you're going to create a volcano that's going to erupt you into the next thing. And so it's about managing that elasticity so that you don't pull that bungee so tight that it snaps back on you.
Which, I think it's like management of like it's awareness of your body. Like it's only comes through that, right? And being regulated by others.
Well, the body is our closest tool that we can use, that's most familiar to us. But if I always say understanding the body, which has been, my life's work really, and it's never ending, it's like I'm now developing a course in quantum biology, and then I'm like, but what's beneath that? It just goes on and on. But when you through understanding this, or getting some theories about, I don't think we know anything down here. We're very, cut off from deep truth, but we're getting there. We're figuring. The whole point is to figure your way out of the maze, right?
Well,
that's what we're here to do.
The point is like no one has it figured out, and that's the
journey.
Point.
That's why you don't go to school and then are surprised when they give you a test, right? It's like, that's kind of the point of why you went to school. So when you understand the body, you have a working model through which you can view all the things that happen to you planetarily, behaviorally, cosmologically. So everything is in the universe is just a repeating pattern. It's very complex, but pattern recognition, that's just something I was always very intrigued to, just sitting in those TV studios. That was pattern recognition. Oh, he's behaving like that. And then when he does that, she reacts that way. And, I just literally, it was like a field experiment. It was like on safari, I was like, yes, how are they behaving in the wild,
What's, actually to come back to that place, I mean, you talked about how you work with a number of like high profile artists, musicians, people on stage, and I think that being on my own vision is to be on stage. Is to go play Glastonbury because that sounds insane. So let's put it out there, but also people building businesses. People building anything where they're elevating their visibility,
exposing,
and their reach into the world, whether it's through art or as I say, like I've got a friend Jesh who's just been on stage for this AI business that he's building, and it's like very magnetic in terms of out there. And you say, in terms of how we shift of getting off stage and you have all this attention, and suddenly, how do you do that in a conscious way? How do we move into what's the kind of the suggestion, the advice around, if I want to go be on stage and perform for lots of people, how do I do that in a way that I'm not going to implode?
Yeah, you've got to preempt things and put things in place to manage. I always say with artists who go out on stage for a living, whether it be a classical musician, a rock musician, a ballet dancer, whatever, all the training is about doing the thing. Nobody trains you how to get from the dressing room to the stage. Nobody trains you how to get from the stage to the dressing room with all the people in your face that happens after a show. And then how do you get home and what do you do when you get home? Those to me are more important, or as important as what you're doing on the stage. Because typically, with even those who have performance anxiety, they're actually more comfortable on stage than they are. That was me. I was like, put me on the stage, I'm fine. I don't put me in a one-to-one conversation with somebody when I was a kid.
Sorry.
No, now I'm fine. I'm totally fine. You won't shut me up now. But as a kid, I did my first film acting job when I was 5. I was in full-time theatre training from the age of 7. From the age of 8, I was touring with a ballet company, which I did for 5 years. I was in and out of school, touring nationally, internationally, performing and signing autographs and doing all the things. Perfectly happy there. Back at school, and teachers and people, I couldn't handle that, so real life was the problem for me. So I need the skills to be able to handle that versus being on the stage. So that's what I always say to artists is make sure you've anticipated that crash when you come off the stage. I've worked with a lot of bands, like music bands, and you actually need to work as a team together. It's like, before I go on, can you not be in just don't talk to me, just give me a little bit of space, just you can be there and go. But if you're like, oh, are you okay? Are you all right? It's like, it's overstimulation again. So some people need that. So there are very many different ways that people respond to stress. Some get hyper agitated, hyper vigilant, hypersensitized. So if you go up to them and go, oh, it's okay, it's gonna make them worse. Right. So they need to isolate themselves, and so I get people set a little playlist of songs that regulate your nervous system. Have your practice before you get onto the stage. For others who tend to go more into the freeze state versus the anxiety state, if you isolate them, they're going to spiral and they won't be on stage. You're like, where are they? They're in the bathroom, cut off. So you need to make eye contact. Okay, look at me. Come on, here we go. Let's go. You need to pep them up. So I would get band members to get to know, give their request to the others. Okay, this is what I need in the run-up. So I need to be in the dressing room on my own. No, I need to be with the gang and be doing the rah-rah team thing. And then how do you get off the stage as well? And that's often difficult because there's so much, particularly in that sort of scenario, there's a lot of stimulation, there's a lot of people backstage and everyone's wanting to party, and you're still on this high and buzz, but you want it to go quiet because you've just given everything. I think it was Victoria Wood, the English comedian, once she'd done a big live, stand-up show in a theatre, and then she came to the stage door and there's all the people wanting autographs, wanting to talk to her. And she said, I've just given you 2 hours of my life. I can't give you any more. So where do you create those boundaries to manage that transition? So that's one thing I advise, is knowing how you tend to feel before a show or after a show. Make sure you've plotted and built in things that are going to support that beforehand. It's like, we don't wait until we fall off the cliff and then go, oh, maybe I should have had some ropes. Right? Yeah. Let's set the infrastructure up beforehand and preempt those things. And, like when I was singing with the band that I was with, I had a male singing partner, and we'd come off stage and all the musicians would just disappear, they'd go home, and then he and I would just sit chatting for ages afterwards at the venue, and then we'd get in our cars to drive home, and often we would in remote places and driving back home, it was like a 2-hour drive after the gig or something, and so we'd literally talk to each other on the phone the whole way back. And so we managed ourselves back, so that when you got home, you having context, that contrast of being on stage with all that attention to the silence. It's a big drop.
There's so many, there's so many musicians, really famous musicians who have so the 27 Club. suicide at whatever age, because there's a lot of that which is, addiction.
Because nobody taught them how to manage it. Yeah. And even, I was in talks kind of before the pandemic hit. I was in talks with a few like music labels here about, they were doing their mental health kick that everyone was doing at the time. But I just knew, again, it was almost like, because it got taken off the table with the pandemic and everything, but I was like, it was good because that was not the right path for me, because they wanted me to come in and create stuff to fix the artists. Like, they were broken, you need to fix them. And I was like, no, I need to speak to the managers, the agents, the touring managers, you all need to do this. Everyone's a mess here.
I think about
you're loading it all on the artist when it's really that infrastructure. And if we had a well-regulated artist manager who could manage their own nervous system, then they're much more likely to be able to create a conducive environment for their artists. I used to go into these labels and say, in what other industry do you deliberately sabotage your commodity? Because they have addiction issues, they're hyper anxious, and you've got the full bar backstage in their dressing room, bottles of whiskey everywhere, drug, anything you want shows up. And then you expect them to be coherent and doing a good job and able to do their PR commitments and not be a complete wreck. It's like you are deliberately sabotaging the thing that you are making your money from. But of course, it's a disposable industry. Well, if they crash and burn, we'll get there's another 60 lined up.
I also think about, where we are, which is this place which has a lot of creators, and just like the model of it has changed, which it's not that we don't have the musicians on the big stage today, but we haven't always had the always on, and there's creators who have like audiences of millions, and they're always on in terms of the social media and that whole thing.
Yeah, this is a very new level of exposure, because it's not just what you're doing in your performance role, it's every day you are in performance, essentially, on social media and all those. I've worked with a lot of artists on social media addiction and managing that, because that is, for me, you're just performing 24/7 then, and you're, at least in a performance state, you're not getting individual criticisms from every audience member. I have some notes for you,
let me come up on stage and take this notes here.
Whereas now, everyone's giving you notes, right? Everyone's criticizing, then they're having conversations about you that you are aware. That would happen potentially. People went home after a show and said, oh no, I didn't like him tonight, I thought that wasn't very good or whatever, but you weren't party to that. Now it's that overexposure, and when you're a hypersensitized person who cannot filter, and you have a skewing of your reward versus punishment mechanisms, then you're trying to get a reward. Because even, I always say to people when I'm working with phone addiction and stuff, it's like, what makes you pick up, everyone's always picking up the phone. What's making you do that? And biologically, it's a stress response. You have created a bond with that device that is the same as the parental bond. And this is the same with kids now, who go into complete meltdowns if you remove their device from them. It's separation anxiety. So when I see that hand go to the phone, I said, why are you doing that? I'm like, you've just had a cortisol hit. That's a stress hormone that is driving you to pick the phone up. And then as soon as you scroll, you get a dopamine hit. Reward, punishment. So you're like, punish, reward. Punish. So it's literally a biological addiction. So when you have that predisposition anyway, that was just reserved previously for your performance world, and now it's there 24/7, and you wonder why people don't rest, they can't sleep, and that's just a route to the body starting to throw rocks rather than give you little tingles here and there, right? So we have to really, it comes down to self-responsibility. If you have an issue with those sorts of things, and often, when I've been helping people with a drug addiction or, something that's more loud and obvious, there's this thing we call transference. They're often transferring it to another thing. Like I've had, people who were dealing with alcoholism who then became triathletes, and then every moment their day was obsessed with I'm like, it's kind of a transference here, but at least it's a little healthier for you. It's making you fit, and you don't want to drink because it's going to sabotage your triathlon now. So but we also still need to get to that reason why it's such a, it's still an anxiety an anxious relationship to it. I haven't done my training today. Well, I can't go in the studio today because I haven't done my run. It's like,
the fear. Yeah.
So it's still a fear-based model. So we still need to get to that, but it can be like a stepping stone. But now we live in a world where these things are, with us. The opportunities, like normally the bar didn't open until 6, right? But now you've got the phone the moment you wake up and even through the night and all those things, which is why I don't use a phone anymore.
I mean,
so I prove, and I was people that know me today are like, oh, she's, but I used to be like, have the latest everything, and I was like the first one when you didn't have to have a printed boarding pass. I can just use my phone and do that. I loved all of that. But then I started to see the biological effects of it, and then I was like, and then seeing people around me suddenly have problems with it, and I just have to practice what I preach. But I just love it. I'm not on social media either.
So
and
cool.
You miss out on a few things here and there, but I quite like being the ignorant. Oh, I didn't know that I was kicked off.
Yeah.
Whatever. Our nervous systems are not designed to take in the entire world's issues. We are designed to live in small groups and deal with our local interpersonal relationships and local environmental challenges. But my nervous system is not designed to hear that a bus crashed in Japan and 30 people died or something. It's like, I can't take that on.
Well, it's also like the feedback, which is the one of these buckets of my life that feels so nourishing at the moment is my localized life. Like I have very close friends within a couple of blocks of me. I bike here. I bike to the gym, to yoga, everything. I have so much within walking distance and biking distance and community within that feels so. I guess maybe what's one of the reasons I don't really care what's going on out in the world, and whether that's self-centered or selfish, I don't really care.
No, but that's the thing. We've been invited to think that that's selfish. It's like, no, I'm actually going to be more productive with the people I can physically actually support.
I can be of most service to the world.
Yeah, I'm not going to get on a plane and fly out to all these disaster zones, and that it's not practical. So, and it's also about a lot of that and a lot of the activism and things that I see with people. And again, we kind of like to praise that and whatever, but it's often, I always say it's about the journey to the self. Yes, the local community, but if you don't have a good relationship with yourself, that's how I don't need to be on social media anymore, because I sorted my relationship to myself, which I didn't have before. That's why I don't need to be on a phone, whatever, because I'm perfectly happy being around me, which was a long time coming. So that's the real hub of it, is the full circle to come back to you. And once you've got that, then you can be discerning about, I know where I can be of most value, and I'm not going to waste my time yelling at this and protesting that, because I can't actually affect change there. I'm just making myself feel good because I'm waving a particular flag or whatever. When you have that good sense of self, again, it's honouring the cycles. Today, I don't have it. When I train practitioners, I say it's actually not helpful to somebody else to go and treat them when you are in a state of depletion. It's an energy exchange. Even just our conversation is an energy exchange. If I was sitting here going, I'm a bit tired today, I really didn't want to do this, that's affecting I have no right. I always say we're all in one big swimming pool on this planet, right? We're all in the same field. We are of the same field. It's like being in the same bath water. So I don't pee in your own drinking water and then expect everyone else to drink it too, right? We have a responsibility to the field. So if I'm having a slow, dark time, then to the best that I can, I'm not going to inflict that on other people.
You take care of your shit. It's like personal responsibility.
Yeah. And then when I'm going out to, and I'm not really treating full time anymore, because I got to that point where I didn't want my income to be dependent on that, because then I was forcing myself to go and do it when I'm like, oh, I really can't today. I have no right to go and do an energy exchange with someone when my tank is half full, because I'm just a mirror and they're going to reflect me.
Yeah.
So I have to be coming from a place of fullness and
resourcefulness,
being replete. before I can have an exchange with someone, and being disciplined about that, and then trusting that is the law of the universe. And when you trust that, everything works out. So the stories I told myself about, well, if you're not doing that, how are you going to pay the rent, or how are you going to... It's like, no, I will not put myself behind having to check these boxes. I put myself first, and then the universe self-organizes around you, because you're becoming coherent in the field. If you're constantly in this kind of fricative state, you're like in the pond that we're all in. You're the kid splashing up one end, and nobody wants to be around the splashing kid, so no one's going to want to say, please come and do this and come and teach here or whatever, because you're like this person. I don't want that energy. So it's trust, and that's like stepping off the cliff and not knowing the path's going to appear, because I knew it from all the studying I'd done, but then I had to put it into practice. Right, I am saying no to
walking the walk,
doing that, and it's very difficult when you're the person that helps people. Well, I do. I can't have my treatment. I'm like, I've given you all the tools.
Yeah.
You don't need me.
Well, we're gonna.
My job is to make myself redundant.
I'm gonna wrap us up, but it's the self-empowerment. Like we have everything that we need.
And even going to someone for treatment, as when I train practitioners, it's like your job is to make yourself redundant. You do not create dependency, and a lot of the healthcare models have created
therapy is it's dependency rather than...
When people say, well, I just want to come here and let you do it, I'm like, I'm not interested in working with you then, because...
Can you tell me how to do everything, please?
No, you can tell yourself.
Thank you.
No, I will give you some tools.
Okay. Thank you.
Pleasure.
That was a lot. That was like a lot of good shit. I don't mean that a lot. It was like, that was like a lot of content.
Good bandwidth.